What's up, guys, and welcome to today's video where we discuss how I made $30,000 and paid off the majority of my student loans just by collecting retro video games. Hey guys, sorry to briefly interrupt. I just wanted to say that if you're watching the video, you're most likely not yet subscribed. We're really pushing for that 1,000 subscribers, so I've added an incentive. If we can hit 1,000 subs, I will do a Just Dance video wearing this. Enjoy the rest of the video. Thank you for watching. So back about 5-6 years ago, I decided that I was going to start collecting retro video games, and it was kind of a big decision for me. My dad was into collecting antiques and things, and for me, I kind of wanted to get into that as well, but I wasn't sure if there was something that I felt passionate enough about or I had enough knowledge about that would really translate into something good for me to collect. That was when I landed on video games. I mean, video games for me, I've been playing games for as long as I can remember. So the very first item I bought off of eBay, and originally, I wanted to buy an Atari 2600 because to me, the Atari 2600 was kind of the start of console gaming as like a popular pastime. And so I was looking at some Ataris and nothing really stood out in the condition that I was looking for. And so I decided, instead of doing an Atari 2600, I should do the Nintendo Entertainment System. So I started with a Nintendo Entertainment System, mostly because we weren't Nintendo kids growing up. We had the Sega Genesis, we moved to the Sony platform. So Nintendo as a whole is kind of this big blind spot in my backlog of video games. And I thought, well, what better way to fill that blind spot than to start with Nintendo? So I bought this Nintendo Entertainment System that was in the original box. It came with the plastic sleeves and the styrofoam insert, the manuals. I think it came with Mario and the Zapper gun for Duck Hunt. It was a complete set, and it was the first thing that I ever added to my collection. I thought this thing was like the coolest thing. Every time one of my friends came over, I would show it to them. I'd be like, oh, look at this thing. I've started collecting old school games and all this stuff. And it got to the point where a lot of my friends were like, well, hey, I have a Sega Genesis in the closet, or I have a Super Nintendo in the closet. Like, how much would you give me for it? And so I kind of started small, started with the people that I knew and made them offers, and they would sell to me, and then my collection just kind of grew over time. When I moved on from collecting from friends and family, it was time to venture out into the world of Craigslist and garage sales. And this is where I really started to find the good deals on games, especially at garage sales. Garage sales are a place where everyone just pulls their junk out of their attic, their garage, their basement, and they put it out for sale. They just chuck the boxes in the driveway and they say, this is 20 bucks, this is 40 bucks, this is 10 bucks. And 5-6 years ago, people really didn't understand what they had, especially when it came to retro video games. They just saw, well, I've got the old GameCube in the basement, so I'm going to sell that and 20 games for 20 bucks. And so a lot of times I would go to garage sales, I would find these boxes full of games, and it would have some absurdly low price on it. And it was an easy buy. It was like, yeah, great, okay, awesome. Something that most people probably don't understand about garage selling, especially when you get really into it and you're doing it a lot, is that you start to see the same people over and over and over again. You start to run into people multiple times. People start to become recognizable and familiar. And you realize that people are doing the same thing you are. And so it actually got pretty competitive at a certain point. There would be 2 or 3 guys that I would see at every single garage sale. So a lot of times when you were going and you saw these same people over and over and again, you kind of got this competitive nature about it where you'd be like, okay, well, if they're at that house, they probably started here, which means I should probably start a house ahead of them and, you know, hit the sales they haven't hit yet, because I'm sure they've bought what's available from those first sales. So there was a bit of a competitive nature when it came to seeing the same people over and over again and realizing that they wanted to buy the same stuff that you wanted to buy. This leads me to my most memorable moment. There was a moment in which I showed up to this kid's house. He was having a garage sale. He posted it on Craigslist. It said that there were going to be video games there. I walk up, I see that there's no games out yet. I say, hey, you advertised that there were going to be games here. And this kid was like, oh yeah, I'm moving to China, and he was trying to get some money for that, so he was going to be selling his old games. And I was like, okay, great. Like, send them out. Give them to me. Let me see what you got. And so he came out with this giant box. It was huge. He walks out with this giant box plops it down, and opens it up. And it's honestly, it's like 40 NES games in pristine condition. They were insane. It was amazing. It was one of the better scores that I'd ever seen, just based on condition. They were all complete in their original box. Like, it was insane. So immediately in my mind, I was like, I'm buying this. Like, I don't care what he wants. I'm buying this. And so I asked him, I was like, you know, what do you want for the box? And he said he wanted $400. And in my mind, I was like, sold. Give them to me. Because 8 of those 40 games were probably worth $400. So it was a very easy buy for me. I didn't have $400 at the time, but I said, I'm going to buy this. I'm going to run to the bank. I'll be right back. Don't sell it, basically. So I came back actually with $500. I didn't want to feel like I was ripping him off. Obviously, he was getting the games for as much as he wanted for them. That was the price that he set, but at the same time, like, they were worth so much more. So I threw in an extra $100. I said, here's $500. Enjoy China. Like, thank you very much for opening early, and thank you for the games. I got this, I'm holding this giant box, and I'm like waddling it back to my car. And who shows up? One of my rivals. It was like Red versus Blue, Ash versus Gary. This guy was at every single garage sale that I would go to that advertised video games. Every single one. And a lot of times, he was the guy walking out with the box full of video games. So, this was like my moment, right? It was my moment. It felt so good. He pulls through. He sees me with this giant box of video games. He sees me, pulls into the driveway, pulls out of the driveway, turns around, and leaves. He didn't even stop. He didn't even stop to look. Oh, it was one of the most, like, victorious moments of my garage sailing / collecting career, if you want to call it that. It was beautiful. But that's what I'm talking about. Like, I don't think people really understand how competitive it can get, especially when you're like a serial garage sailor. I don't know if that would be the word or not, but when you're going to garage sales every weekend, you start seeing the same people and you start getting a little competitive over stuff. Okay, so you guys might be saying, all right, Java, so that was your biggest win against the competition, but what was your biggest score? So I got a message from a guy on Craigslist. This guy just said, I've got a crazy amount of games, and I want you to come buy them. And I was like, okay. You know, can you tell me more about the games? Because I didn't want to make an offer. I didn't want to drive to where he was, if it wasn't going to pay off, obviously. So this guy tells me his friend owned the shop next to him in this mall, and the shop next to him used to be a comic book and retro video game store. His friend went out of business and sold his entire inventory to this guy, who's now emailing me that he has an entire inventory of a retro video game store that he's trying to sell. Obviously, I want in on that shit. So I get in the car, I drive to where he is. It's super early in the morning. He lets me in before the mall even opens. And it was like walking in the golden pearly gates or whatever the fuck they are. It was amazing. You walk in and it was just games littered all over the floor. Consoles, games, anything you could imagine was just everywhere, scattered everywhere. And so I start to kind of make my way around, kind of surveying what's there, trying to calculate as fast as possible in my mind of like what all this could possibly cost, because I knew I either was going to walk out with all of it or I was going to walk out with none of it. That was one thing that I really prided myself on, was my knowledge of games and their prices. I didn't want to be that guy who was standing in the middle of a garage sale on eBay on his phone trying to price something that's in the garage sale, right? I didn't want to be that guy. So I'm going through, I'm calculating the prices on all the games that this guy has, and it was an astronomical number. At a certain point, I had just realized that I was probably not going to get it. So I said, how much do you want? Naturally, I was just like, how much do you want? Like, I don't even know what to offer you. How much are you looking for? And to my surprise, he said $1,250. $1,250. It was like Christmas. It was like Christmas in my head. It was like fireworks going off in my head. It was insane that he would ask for $1,250 for all of these games. There's probably $10,000 worth of games in that room. I immediately, yeah, okay, $1,250. I had $1,000 on me because I assumed that he had a ton and that they were going to be worth. So I ran to the bank and got $250 more, came back, bought everything, and shoved as much shit in my car as possibly would fit. Basically, I started with the games first because that was the most expensive stuff. Came back the next day and got all the consoles. That was my biggest score. My biggest score was spending $1,250 on probably $10,000 worth of video games. So one thing that I would do as I collected is over time, you start to get doubles, because if you're keeping a collection and you're also going to garage sales, you start to get doubles of games that you had before, right? So basically what I would do is I would sell the doubles that I would get, and a lot of times that would recoup the amount of money that I actually spent on the purchase. So the majority of my collection at the end of the day was free, because most of the time I was able to sell either the unwanted or the doubles to make up for the stuff that I wanted in my collection. So all the stuff that was in my collection was essentially just profit after I sold it. I actually quit my job at Target about a year before I finished school, because it took me about that entire year to sell the amount of games that I had accrued over the last 4 or 5 years of collecting. And at the end of the day, I made about $30,000, which I was able to put toward the majority of my student loans. So, can you do this today? That might be your question. That might be your question now. You might be sitting there like, oh shit, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do this now. I would say that you probably can still do this today, but it's way harder than it used to be. 5-6 years ago, people weren't really aware of how collectible and how expensive these old school games are. And I feel like there's even been a larger growth in popularity of people who want to play these older games on the older systems. That's why we have stuff like an NES Classic and an SNES Classic or Mini or whatever it is, because people like that nostalgia and people want to play those games on those controllers, on those systems nowadays. I think today it's very clear to people that old video games are collectible, and they're willing to price them as collectibles now instead of just as old games like they were about 5-6 years ago. So I do think you probably still could collect or resell games for profit, but I think it's definitely much harder nowadays than it was when I first started. All right, the last thing I will say is I regret it. I regret selling my games. Now, the problem is I paid down a lot of my student loans, which then turned into me having a lesser monthly payment on my student loans, which turned into me being able to move out of my parents' house a lot sooner than if I would have had the full brunt of the loans, which turned into me being able to do stuff like get my cats and stuff like that. So if I look back, I always think, man, I really wish I hadn't sold those. But then I think I wouldn't have Mika and Keiko. I wouldn't have the independence I have right now if I hadn't sold those games. So it needed to happen, and I'm going to start collecting again. I actually got a pretty decent score recently in my new foray back into collecting that I'm going to make a video about. So stay tuned for that. I'll make a video about that score. I hope this video was informative. Maybe you learned something. If it was just entertaining or you learned a little bit more about me, I hope you guys like this video. Please comment below what your favorite old school game is, or any old school game that you would like to kick off your collection with. And I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Thanks for stopping in, and we'll see you on the next video.